Hopefully by now you have seen our trio of films with the iconic McLaren F1, legendary Porsche 911 GT1 and magnificent Mercedes CLK GTR. It was fairly obviously an incredible day, the sort of day that you just want to keep on reliving. So after the dust had settled, I sat down with James Cottingham of DK Engineering to talk about the cars, what they're like to drive and some of the stories behind them. Thank you very much for everything really. Thank you very much for this, because it is amazing, and I just can't help I keep looking over thinking it can't be real. All of them there, all of them in silver. It's pretty incredible.
And it's amazing that it's taken so long to get them together as well. I can't, when you look back and so few people have done all of them together sort of article or feature. So.
Yes, exactly, over 20 years. So I thought we'd just go through each one, and you can tell us a bit about obviously what you know about the cars, because you know them better than most. And we've got to start with the F1 really, haven't we? Because it started this whole chain of events
by mistake.
Yes.
Which is the amazing thing. And it's the one that everyone knows about. Probably actually it's the one that people know the most about as well, because it's been in the spotlight so much over the years. And that particular car is chassis 37. So it's had two owners during its whole life, and the most recent owners had it for over 20 years and took it to South Africa. Well, they bought it in Germany from the first owner, took it to South Africa, then back to the UK, then to California, then back to South Africa for a very long stint, and then it's come back in 2020 to the UK. And it's one of the few F1s that remains its original colour combination. So many cars, MSO had this really good sort of personalisation system going on, which I think Pagani have since then taken over with the amount they do. But no Pagani seems to be in its original spec anymore.
No.
Well, it's very similar for F1s. A lot of them have been painted, trimmed, high downforce kit added, some removed, all that sort of stuff. But this is one of those rare cars that remains in its original colour combination and actually the original materials. So is it the only one with an Alcantara, full Alcantara? Only interior? One with full Alcantara interior from new, which it is the original interior, and it stood up to the test of time, very well. The first owner was known to have had towels that he made everyone sit on when they sat in it, and then the second owners, they had some fabric sheets made in South Africa to sort of fit over the seats, which I think we can do a better job of that this time. But it's done the job. I mean, it's just amazing how nice and original the interior is, and you have to stroke it every time you get in and out so that all the Alcantara sort of goes in the right direction, otherwise it does look like a mess. And also paint-wise, it's original. We've painted the front and rear bumpers because it had a few sort of small stress fractures and things like that. But other than that, the car is it's original paint, which today puts it in in a bracket of 64 road cars, which are super valuable. You've got to try and find a differentiation. It's a bit like F40s. That's why mileage is so important for F40s. Well, I think with an F1 today, it comes down to originality. So that's a really great car from that point of view. And actually, I think an F1 does need to be silver because it's the colour of the car that's most associated with them. It's always special jumping into one of those. Always special having one around. We're really lucky that we've always got at least one lying around here at DK. Is there much variance? Because you've obviously I've driven, that's the third one I've driven, and they've all been just a little bit different, I suppose, in terms of them. But I think the road cars are much of a muchness. The good thing is that the servicing, which was one of the things, sort of the prohibitive values from rising for a very long time, is now irrelevant because it's such a small fraction versus total value that the servicing schedule is so thorough. And obviously at Millbrook we saw chassis 28, which is another car I've sold in the past, which belongs to a very good friend, being tested by Pani from MSO post-service. And you look at the list that they go through, the shakedown list. I mean, I must admit that we do use that as a bit of a basis for the shakedown of the other two cars.
Oh, really?
Because it's so thorough, and such is the sort of the nature of that service program, that the cars are always, as long as they've been back to MSO periodically, they are always absolutely top-notch throughout. And I think, invariably the cars have differences car to car, but the way they drive always does seem to be fairly similar. They're very tyre sensitive age-wise.
Because I noticed this is obviously, you say tyres, but they always seem to be on those specific tyres. They are kept very original, aren't they? Sort of even ones that change. And I think
there's one owner that has done modifications to car, brakes and wheels and different tyres and things like that. But luckily, people do tend to sort of revert to standard specification. Although I wouldn't be surprised if within the next year or so we do see someone doing a ceramic disc and pad upgrade only, which fit into the original wheel. In fact, I'm amazed that no one's done it yet, because we've been talking about it on the F40 for ages, and I just haven't quite pulled the trigger, but it is in process. And I'd imagine, and I think that's about to happen on these. But yeah, otherwise...
It makes sense, wouldn't it? Because it is, well, Gordon has admitted himself that it's, one of the things that really hasn't stood the test of time is the brakes on
no, and you do notice it.
Yeah, you do.
I think both you and I commented on the fact that there are some sort of limiting factors to driving them quickly. But then if it was too good, it would be a bit boring, wouldn't it? It's got to be... I'm not saying they're disappointing, but they are, in some areas, they are slightly disappointing. But maybe surprising is the right word.
So jumping out of that, all sorts of things sort of come back to you, and the driving position feels all at once brilliant, because it's obviously in the centre and you've got the fantastic visibility, but also slightly alien because you are in the centre and you're just not used to sort of having the same width either side of you. But then the dynamics, I described it a bit like you feel like you are driving an engine initially, and it's a bit like that thing I remember when I was learning to drive, and somebody would say to you, don't let the car drive you, you have to drive the car. And jumping back in that, it's quite difficult in some ways not to let the engine drive you, because it's such an all-encompassing, from the induction noise on the top of you to it's the responsiveness, and that responsiveness somehow doesn't always match the other facets of the car. So you've got a lot of lean and rolling and those sort of tall
lack of self-centering on the steering.
Exactly.
Actually, also I think often you go up the road, and that's more of a surprising factor when you're sort of negotiating traffic and thinking, watch out, I'm in something pretty special here. And most people don't realise, which is another great factor of the F1, that today, I think it's 1 in 10 people that realise what it is, and everyone else just has no idea.
No.
And then you pick up on those insufficiencies a bit more easily. I found I jumped in it that day and sort of drove it harder, faster, or sooner, because you feel comfortable. And as you say, the seat, for me, it's perfect fit, pedals, gauges, steering wheel. You forget about the self-centering thing once you start driving quickly. And then the rear end's really like when you don't brake hard enough from speed, so the aero's not working. And what road car do you notice that in? Well, that. It's
a car that I can see why you would really want to own it and keep it for a long time, because it's that lovely thing of getting to know it. A bit like an old 911. You don't jump into an old 911 for the first time and instantly feel like because hang on a minute, the front's not turning in, and then you've got this pendulum behind you. Amazing. And all those sorts of things. But it's sort of the same with that. There's so many things to get used to, and actually.
But it doesn't come with a warning sticker.
No.
You jump in an F40 and you think, I've got to be careful.
Yeah.
And you get home and you think, I'm lucky to be home. You jump in an old 911 and you think about that sort of weighted, inherent issue, but no one gives you the warning sticker for an F1 that says, hey, by the way, this might happen.
Yes. It's and just in terms of its racing history, obviously it started all this off, as we say, and it was a reluctant racing hero in some respects, wasn't it?
Yeah, and that's key to values. Of course, this isn't about values, but everyone talks about values. And it's key to the values, and I'm one of the few people that probably says something that would probably really wind up the real F1 aficionados, but I don't think, given a rematch, it would have won Le Mans again in '95. It was very lucky because of the weather conditions. Of course, it was the car that kick-started the GT1 thing, but there weren't loads of other cars. I mean, the closest competition really was an F40 GTE, which was, 7 or 8 year old design by the time, but extremely modified.
Yeah,
what a great car. but so I think that's what's really sort of.
Yeah, I mean that whole '95, it as you say, played into McLaren's hands. They got pretty lucky.
It's given
because
it double
the weather,
status.
Yeah, absolutely.
And a lot of people talking about the T50, the upcoming T50, they say, it's got lack of pedigree and heritage. Well, clearly it doesn't, because it's very closely linked, and that's a huge factor. But at the end of the day, had it not been a car that went and won Le Mans first time out as a basically lightly modified road car, it still would have been a great car.
Yeah, absolutely. And that race was just extraordinary to say. The fact it was wet, but then the fact which played into their hands, but then there was the gearbox issues, which there was all sorts of stories of them spraying WD-40 into the gearbox linkages to sort of keep it going. And JJ Lotto was obviously phenomenal, and he sort of right the way through the F1's GT1 story, he was pretty integral to it, wasn't he? Because he made sure that stacked up as a long tail against the CLK GTR in many respects. He seemed to be able to do things with that car that, even
and they just let him get on with
couldn't.
it.
Sort of, yeah.
They let him get on with it. He talked to Paul Lanzanti, and whilst he didn't want him to drive like that,
you kind of had to let him, I suppose. If you either
one of those guys that if you said, back off to 9/10, he'd crash.
Yeah. Let's move on to the GT1, which is a curious car, I think, in many respects, it's fair to say, because everyone knows that the front half is 993 or 964, and you said there are other bits in there which we'll come on to, and then 962 in the rear, and it's a curious thing, but I loved it driving it again. How do you feel?
Yeah, I mean, so again, in my sort of career and my life growing up in this industry, you come across cars and then you don't see them for 10 years and then you do. And that very car we had back in 2007 or 6, approximately, or a client had it. And I remember at the time sort of not really knowing what it was all about, because whilst the GT1 story was, we look back on it as a real golden era, I don't think people realised that it was suddenly going to die overnight. And so I didn't really, at the time, understand what it was. And it wasn't until someone said, well, it's not a 911 because it had the 996 headlights, and you sort of looked at it and you thought, oh yeah, there is something a bit different about this. But fast forward to this year, or this last year, where we've had the car completely apart, and I've learnt really fundamentally, it's all very well reading about them and being told about them, but when you actually see one as a bare shell, as we've had that car, and you see actually how much 993 Porsche shell there is, and I think I've been told that it was a Targa they started with.
Oh, really?
And it's incredible when you look at it in pieces that, they sent a 993 Targa. Obviously it didn't have a roof, so they cut the windscreen off, cut it behind the seats, built this sort of integral roll cage around the driver's crash structure, and then built the frame off the back for the engine and gearbox to hang off. So the 962 gearbox has this huge sort of cross member, and it just bolts on. So it is the most, it is actually derived from a real sort of high number production road car. Yeah. And then you get in it and there are lots of familiar sort of gauges and things like that. But the seats are from a 964 and the lights are from a Citroen. There's all sorts of different bits and pieces, and it's I've described it elsewhere as a parts bin car, but the best parts bin, like the expensive shelf. Everything on it is very much that. HEG or HEG were the people that made these shells, and I've learnt a lot about the numbers, the sort of the nitty gritty of
what all the numbers mean.
Yeah. So the race cars, the shells have a HEG number, which is, you can imagine they were delivered 30 993 Targa shells, and they built 30 shells to then be clothed, and each one had a number effectively starting from 101 right up to 135. And so 101 to 109 are the race cars, the first race cars, the first iteration race cars. And then there's a bit of a gap, which they saved for reshells.
Right.
So I'm not clear if they built those 10 cars between 110 and 120, but certainly there are some cars out there with those numbers, because 107, for example, was replaced with a replacement tub 117, but people just always knew that was the chassis number. But I don't think even the Porsche experts, the modern day historic Porsche experts who buy and sell these cars until a friend of mine sort of said to me, I think this is what's going on, and we really researched it, and I pointed out to them that that's what that chassis number is.
Right.
Race car 107 is because the HEG number or HEG number is 107, and et cetera, et cetera. So
which number is that?
So this car is 126 from memory, but it's chassis 5.
Right.
So road car chassis 5. So roughly they start, so 101 to 109 were the race cars, and then the spare shells, and let's say 120 was probably the prototype road car, and from then on, but obviously they're not going to be totally sequential, but they're enough. And all the bits on it are labelled up, and it's built as a race car in terms of every panel that you remove that's removable on the back it's got that number 126 and a weight, in Tipex. So the Germans, as they were building the car, they painted it. They were just about to put it on the car, and they probably were having a sweepstake inside in-house or something. Well, that's just the way they did it. They were that meticulous, and they put it together and added up the numbers and hoped that this number actually matched the finished weight of the car. But it makes it very easy to track the bits and pieces across the car.
Because weight terms, it is very similar to the F1 in terms of, I think the F1's 111.37, and that's sort of, I've seen 1120 or 1150 sort of quoted. Yeah. So somewhere around
maybe the race car's even a bit lighter than that. It's always difficult to tell. Sort of, was it 1050 or 1150? But yeah, I mean, and a real steel tub. Like it's a steel tub with a proper steel roll cage with a frame at the back. It's
unlike the other two, obviously. Yes, and this is obviously the rarest of the three there, which sort of seems extraordinary because
I definitely can't find 25 road cars. I mean, maybe they're out there, and that's the other thing I've discovered. There's a lot of people that have owned these cars from new and have never, VIP clients of Porsche, and they haven't turned a wheel. And I have had conversations in the last 2 years with well-known clients of mine that I know have lots of cars. I had no idea that they had one tucked away. And perhaps at the time, I think they helped Porsche out by ordering one and taking delivery of one.
Because they were about $500,000, weren't they, I think, when they were...
A lot cheaper than the CLK.
So, yes, well, about half the price of the CLK, weren't they? Which, and most were either Arctic Silver or Fern White, is that correct? And
yes, and there was a red one and a yellow one.
Yeah. In terms of driving it on the day, it's the most agricultural of the three, and I couldn't help but step out of it and think that has been designed to last 24 hours. There's a toughness to it, but also weirdly sort of, I mean, the clutch is the most aggressive, but the whole car actually feels like the most friendly to drive, weirdly as well, the one you could actually get to grips with so quickly.
Yeah, I mean, going back to 2007 when I drove it then, I remember going around the M25 in it and thinking, this isn't very fast, and I was much younger then and less experienced than I am now. And yeah, I really was disappointed by it. But as it turns out, I think that car sort of went between collections and needed a big overhaul. And we've been, it's had a restoration of sorts in the last year. And so jumping in it as part of a shakedown and then, letting you have a go at it. It was the car that at the start of the day when someone said, which is your favourite? It wasn't really between that.
No, it was the first one you discounted.
It was between the F1 and the CLK, and I wasn't quite sure which one I would like to own long term for various reasons, which it sounds like a ridiculous thing because people automatically assume, well, of course it's the F1, but actually you've got to sit down and think about your life and what you'd like to get out of it and all those sorts of things. And the GT1 I discounted immediately, but it was the last car I drove on the day, and the car that I thought at the end of it, I'm not done. I want to go round more, and I felt that I could drive it fast sooner. The F1 I drove fast sooner than I should have, and the GT1, I felt at home with it as a racer, as a car that you could push on but feel comfortable and safe with, and know exactly what it's doing. And that gear change,
it's amazing, isn't it?
And as Tiff Nadell pointed out, it's because it comes from the 962 and because it's an all synchro mesh gearbox which raced 13 times at Le Mans. He's right, And I when I listened to him say that before, I thought, it's not really why, is it? But actually it is. It's so good, and they designed that gearbox and they stuck with it because they thought no one's ever going to wrong slot that.
No.
Going back to the F1, quite often, second to third.
Oh, it's almost the worst shift in the world, I think.
Fourth to fifth. That, impossible. I challenge someone to wrong slot a gear in that. It's what it is. It's the ultimate GT3 Porsche.
Yes.
Like the ultimate, because when you buy today a GT3, it's got to be Club Sport package, ceramics, all the lightweight bucket seats and wheels and all the extra bits they now offer.
Except I suppose it's the ultimate GT2 Porsche because of course we've got, and it's the only one here that is turbocharged, which then in period hampered it because obviously the regulations then sort of, I think, partly because of that, and they didn't want it coming along and dominating everything. But on the day as well, driving it, it's such a different experience to the other two in the way that it, perhaps that adds to the, friendliness is the wrong word, but approachability, because you can drive it, at least to start with, sort of off boost until that comes in, because there's a good chunk of performance even before that wave of boost comes in.
I can't help but think that maybe Porsche were sort of reading between the lines of the rules and where they might go, and that there had to be more of a relationship to a real car.
Yes. Well, Norbert's saying, and we'll come on to CLK GTR in a second, but I remember reading a quote from him who's so angry about the CLK GTR, because he really felt that with the GT1 they had actually stuck to the regulations in terms of they had played by the rules, and you can sort of see it looking around. You say you've got all this very obvious 993. It's sort of exactly, and it's got a boot in it, which is fine. It's not the biggest boot in the world, but it's
big enough.
Yeah,
it's bigger than a Ford GT.
Exactly. Yes, it's it's bigger than a Lotus Elise. It's it's vaguely usable, isn't it? And obviously then that morphed into, well, there was the 993 front to the original ones, then it came to the Evo,
which is just a headlight thing and aero and track, but they were effectively the same car, and that is a 993 tub. Yeah, and it's and then I guess the later cars were just their answer to
the
last one,
and which you can tell. So I've been lucky enough to drive the car that won in '98, because this wasn't that successful sort of racing, or it sort of was. It came along in '96, and Brands Hatch was the first race that it did, and Hatch, they blew everyone away, and everyone reckoned they were sandbagging anyway, just to show that we don't want to upset people too much, but they still did, and they won, but they couldn't collect points to start with, and so it was sort of successful, but actually in the championship term wasn't successful. And
Le Mans, though, they were second and third, and first and second in GT1, which is,
but never got that outright victory, which the F1 did, which everyone remembers. Exactly, yeah. And then
I'll be crucified for saying.
And then it obviously got beaten the following year, which was meant to be its full sort of year, by CLK GTR. So it was sort of then lucky that the '98 when they shouldn't have won Le Mans, they did. Yeah. And that then cemented its place in history as well, didn't it? Sort of with what is a totally different car, because it's carbon tub and sequential shift. And actually talking about the gear shift in that being wonderful, the '98 car, the first time I drove it, had cable operated sequential, and of course it's right hand drive, because they figured that was better for the drivers for all the circuits that we were going to. And so it's still there. The cable operated one is just horrendous, because it's almost impossible to sort of, I remember talking to Porsche Museum engineer and sort of saying, I'm not sure this is in first, and he came across it, and all his body weight, both hands, slammed it back and went, there you are, it's in first now. The second time I drove it, they'd put effectively like that, just a direct solid linkage in, and it was and then it was wonderful. It was the car you wanted to be, but so much lighter and dartier, and just a totally different car to drive compared to that. But,
that does feel like it sort of sits down at the rear, and
it feels quite. It still has some 911 about it, actually. I think, sort of in terms of just the feel from the front and the way that you
can. Yeah, it's very.
Yeah, and you can trust the rear. I found of all three cars, you had the most trust in what the rear was doing, and actually how you'd work with it.
And that's why I drew that sort of track day comparison of the GT3. But you're right, it should be the GT2. But I always think of GT3s as the car that everyone sort of thinks about, and it's that's the car that if someone said Silverstone, go quickest, which one of the three, that would be the weapon for me.
Absolutely, yeah.
Because and also, you have to do the lap more than once. Again, it would be that.
It's that.
So that was the biggest surprise for me of the day, driving that.
And such a difference jumping out of the F1 and into that. The difference between a road car and whatever Norbert Singer says about it being, yes, it plays and it's fulfills the regulations. It is a race car.
Whopping roll cage.
Exactly. Yes.
On display.
It's you've got that engine and drivetrain right in there with you in the cabin, haven't you? Let's move on to CLK GTR, which I think again I saw a quote about if the GT1 opened Pandora's box, and the CLK GTR was the car that killed the whole
close it.
gold class stone dead. So tell us about this one.
So that car, that's chassis 7, which of the 20 cars built, so they obviously planned on 25. They did build 26 in the end, but 20 coupes, and then in the end 5 roadsters plus 1. The prototype became a roadster as well. It's got the tartan blade interior, which is
from the 722,
which is such a nice nod to that. And I'm sure there's a link there. You know, and we've said it is. You know, it's chassis 7. Sterling's lucky number was 7. The 722, 300 SLR. There's a clear link there. And I'm pretty sure that car was used for some of the sort of press paraphernalia at the time. Not all of it, but some of it. And that car in chassis 3, I think it was, had that interior. So it's quite easy to relatively easy to try and pinpoint it. And it was owned by a Dutch family, had it for a long time, and it went back to SPS in 2016, had a big service, went to the States, wasn't used at all. And then last year, because I'd had a good run with this sort of era, which fits my age group, and my father's mortified by all these modern cars that are coming through the workshop. I have to remind him they're 25 years old and that we're buying and selling. And I just felt there was a gap, that everyone was missing a trick with the CLK. And it was a hunt to find one. It was a 6-month hunt to find one. And it was just from having a conversation with a friend at one point in time who's into the same sort of cars. He just picked up the phone one day and said, I've just had an amazing conversation with someone that I didn't even know they had the car, and they'd like to sell it. And it wasn't, can I go and look at it? It was how long can I have to pay? And we did the deal. And like all these things, I would love to have kept it for longer, but Dad said everything has to be for sale that's in stock. And so we sort of lightly marketed it. And with the power of social media these days, that car is so photogenic that it just wasn't camera shy, and it was everywhere. And at Christmas we ended up selling it to the new owner. And so we've done a big service on it, and we did a shakedown as part of our thing. And we found a few things wrong with it, which we're putting right. So it's and I love, if you've only got one space in your garage and you owned all 3 of these cars and you got some mates coming round, that's the one you'd have in there. And I'm a Marmite lover, and the whole Marmite analogy is very much CLK GTR. Some people just think it's awesome and love it, and some people think it's awful. And I love that fact that some people might think it's awful, and I know that underneath it's potentially the most special of the 3.
Yes, I mean, I've been lucky enough obviously to see it with the front and rear clamshells off now, and it's
everything about it's ridiculous.
Yeah.
I can open the back of the GT1 on my own. I need to get a tool out. I need to unscrew both sides. I need to pull the clamp back and put it back. But it's got a nice sort of Porsche engineered stay to hold it up, and you have to put your foot on it, and and it works. I could do that on my own.
Not the case at the moment.
I need 3 guys, to do the front and back. And I challenge you to take the rear clam off and not think, I've slightly damaged this. It's just the way it works, because it's a pure race car. And it's, and the doors and getting in and out of it, everyone says, oh, awful to get in and out of. It's a bit like a Carrera GT clutch. You say it's awful to get in and out of unless you've got one, and then you say it's a technique.
Yes.
And it's just all about the technique, and if you've got the technique, it's fine. Which really is not true. Like, Carrera GT clutch is difficult, and it is difficult to get in and out of. But when you roll out of it and everyone's expecting you to sort of do a, Leonardo DiCaprio Wolf of Wall Street sort of roll out of it, and you actually do it really elegantly and can't repeat it again for the next 3 goes because you never get it right. It's really satisfying.
Yeah.
But there's just so much about the car that's different and pushing the envelope, and even when you're in there, you just think, this is really small cockpit, real race car. And
it's intimidating, isn't it? Sitting in that cockpit, I think.
Way ahead of its time, though, isn't it? Because if you think the whole thing about P1s and LaFerraris, tiny cockpit because it's aerodynamic.
Yeah.
Hang on, they did it back then.
And it does feel quite modern, I think, as a car. That surprised me how sort of the gearbox was nowhere near as bad. If we're talking about getting it out is as bad as everyone says. The gearbox is nowhere near as bad as people say, actually.
No, and it's very much one of those things where you can say, well, have you tried it? I think the most difficult thing is remembering that because you're not doing this and you're doing this, because of all the cars that have come since, that you've got to use your left foot.
Yes, yeah.
Because we've all become so used to stopping at the traffic lights and it automatically goes to first.
Yeah.
Those two things are that car you've got to remember, right, I'm going to go up the gears now. Oh, I've got to use the clutch and I've got to come off it. And then when you're coasting into a junction and you want to go down one, and you watch the number and you think, why is it not going down? And it's a clutch thing.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's just utterly outrageous.
Yeah.
And it's, and again, if someone wanted one for a show, you can find 64 of those. Okay, it's about as difficult to find a GT1, but then a lot of people might walk past that and say, oh, is that 996? Or, whereas that is outrageous.
Yeah.
And that's the whole thing, it just, whenever these things culminate, like the turbo era of Formula One, the ultimate was just so ridiculous that they had to ban it, they had to stop it. And that's exactly what the GTR is. And oh so special. And then that engine,
yes, that's
gone on to do so much more. And when you drive it, you just think...
Because that engine was obviously, in the period the race cars had 6-litre V12, which is what then they went to the V8, didn't they, for when they did their Le Mans campaign. But that engine, it's sort of, initially you sort of look at it and go, well, this is a 6.9, but the race cars had 6 litre, is it the same? And it is, isn't it? It's just, it went to Wilmore and they brought it out to 6.9 to become, and then it went on to be, well, Pagani's engine really, didn't it?
And they won 6 out of 11 rounds in 97?
Yes, 97, wasn't it?
And then they won the first 2 rounds in 98, and then the V8 won every round of the FIA GT Championship, that is. I think it's a shame that engine never went to Le Mans.
Yes.
A real shame.
Yeah.
Probably one of the factors that holds that car back is the lack of Le Mans history for a V12 car.
Because again, that's very similar with, in terms of the GT1, feeling like the engine's in the cabin with you, that exactly the same. It's so noisy, and that engine is
raw.
Right there.
Yeah. It's very F50, isn't it? You hear everything going on, and first gear is so long. So if you come off the clutch in first gear and you're manoeuvring, at the office and between all the showrooms and things where you're just manoeuvring between buildings, and you think, well, I don't want to ride the clutch, so you come off first. You're doing like 25 miles an hour, and everyone's like, why are you driving it around so fast? And it's because first gear is so long, because it's just geared to go.
Yeah,
it's flat out, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that engine feels like a very AMG sort of engine, and whereas the F1, it could almost be a sort of a 4-litre or something like that. Such as the response and the way it revs, it could be a smaller V12 than it is. Whereas there is absolutely no doubting that it's best part of 7 litres. It's a big engine with a lot of torque, obviously, because it's got more torque than.
It's got all those CLK nods, headlights, the badge, and then the interior. Yes, the switch is a CLK, and you could be forgiven for thinking it's a CLK steering wheel, but it's because they did such a beautiful job of scaling it down. And the same with the dashboard. You look at the design of the dashboard, and even to the design of the airbag cover for the passenger side, and everything's just sort of styled down. They really were wanting people to say, oh, it's a CLK, just like the one that I got a taxi ride in yesterday. Even the grille, the grille's not from a CLK, but at a glance, you could be forgiven for thinking, that it came from the same parts bit. And again, that's why that car's just so bespoke. That's what we like with the old cars, is stuff that, that's why the F1 interior is so special. Everything's designed differently and unique to the car.
And I think that's a good point about it being, because people might look inside and think, when you say parts of special, that's what you sort of think of with that, but actually, no, it's really much
And when
more.
I say parts bin special, I mean made from parts from the special parts bin.
Yes,
Don't get me wrong.
Yes. Absolutely. But I think driving that as well, the thing that surprised me, because you walk up to it and it is vast, isn't it, as a car? You sit there, it's just
ginormous.
But to drive it doesn't feel as big. I think I described it as if you see it with both the front and rear clamshells off, and actually how much shorter it then becomes because you haven't got the overhangs. That's what it feels like to drive, which sort of makes
and
total
it's quite
sense,
compliant, and it's not a crashy, firm ride. No. I think out of the 3 of them, the one that actually has the most sort of race car-y ride, in some ways, aside from the profile of the tyre, is the F1. You have that sort of suspension knock, the knocks and the clonks, which are very sort of race car derived.
Rose jointed, sort of, yeah.
We get in trouble again, but perhaps, dare I say, it's a bit Kit Car-y in that sense, because they designed something beautifully and did it really well, but it probably never went through the thousands of hours of rig testing
the big manufacturer
that the other two did.
Yeah. The thing with the suspension on that is you can feel, because it's obviously got the carbon aluminium honeycomb monocoque at the centre, and you can feel how stiff that is and how that's then lets it sort of more so than the GT1. It's got this absolutely solid structure that then actually can let the suspension work a bit more, because it stays really flat when you corner it. It feels wide, it feels flat, but it can still breathe with the road, because Millbrook's not the smoothest place to drive around. That also, we should mention, there is something slightly different about that car, because the wheels are slightly bigger, aren't they?
Yeah, and that comes down to serviceability. So you just can't get the tyres for the original size wheels. So now it's 19s on the front and 20s on the rear.
Yeah.
And I can't remember what it was originally. Was it?
It was
18s and 19s.
Yes, yeah.
Was it 18s all round?
I think it was 18s all round.
Yeah,
yes.
so it was 18. So yeah, from a serviceability point of view, it was 18s all round. Now 19s and 20s front and rear, so you can get the tyres.
Yeah.
They make the tyres from the McLaren, so 64 of them, but at just 25. and actually, that's the other thing, is I know so many of these CLKs that don't go anywhere. They don't get used. I can think of a car sitting in storage very close to here that hasn't turned a wheel for years. One of the Roadsters, until we sort of got it running recently, it's done 240 kilometres. So it's those cars, and I think there's a bit of an intimidation, but we're going to see those cars out and about a bit more in the coming years, especially that one, which I'm really excited about.
Yes,
following its life on Instagram.
Exactly. Yes.
But,
have you driven the Roadster?
Yeah.
What are the differences between this and the Roadster?
Well, it's easy to get in and out of.
Yeah.
Not a huge amount. I mean, it's interesting, because a year and a half ago, a year ago, I was at Cavallino in Florida, and this is when I'd started my sort of thought process of I'm going to buy one. And you never tell the other dealers, but you sort of ask their opinion, and do you know of any cars? Because as soon as they know it's actually us that wants to buy one, it becomes more expensive. And I was on the sort of Roadster track at that time, because it was less money. I mean, a Roadster has been less money, even though they're rarer. And I couldn't really understand why. And then you got talking, a lot of people say, yeah, but the CLK Coupe is the race car, it's the one, that's the look you want, and et cetera, et cetera. And that was the opportunity I was offered in the end, so that's the way we went. But having done some miles in a Roadster now, I think they should be worth the same. And maybe perhaps the lack of looks, because it's not the race car derived looks, is made up for by the fact is, in some ways it's slightly more practical, although it has no roof whatsoever. But generally there aren't that bigger difference. I mean, the main difference is in the engine bay, because of the different inlet system. They've got different inlet manifolds and a bit more difficult to service. You have to have the engine out of that to do a major service.
Right. Okay.
But really there aren't that many differences, and what a good idea.
Yeah.
I mean, they were probably the first manufacturer to think this is how we're going to sell the balance of the cars, and since then we've seen other people.
Yes, well, it's a standard thing now, isn't it? You almost expect it to be
it's time to offer the Roadster.
So,
yeah.
But
almost we should have had one as well, but then they really would steal the show then.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's wrap up. If you could only take one, which one would it be?
Well, from everything I've said, you'd be surprised by my answer, and I think you've got to come back a few steps and sort of get away from the few hours of fun, getting the most out of a car, knowing that you're only going to have a few hours in it, is not necessarily a fair reflection of forever car.
Yep.
And that's what the F1 does so well.
Yeah.
It's that forever car. And Gordon, at the time, he set out to build the perfect car for him. Mm. And I think as a part of his background, he was so used to pulling together all the different characteristics that a Formula 1 car, for example, would need, and putting them together and creating this perfect blend that sometimes was extraordinary in the way it was delivered, but worked. The F1 was that car, and I would want a car that I could just have in the garage, and like all people that have too many cars, you never use 90% of them. So if you could only have one car and it was the car, it would be that, because you do jump in it and get the most out of it quite quickly, and you can do the most with it, and you can have 2 friends in, which is a huge thing. It's as simple as it is a huge thing. And yes, it's got that pedigree.
Yeah.
You know, there are races out there I shouldn't have won, but I have, and I'm not going to give them back. I'm not saying it shouldn't have won, but I just, in a rematch, slightly different conditions, I don't think it would have been the same. But I think that is the car. I think the GT1 deserves a lot more praise than it's given credit for because of everything we've discussed, because it has so much Porsche DNA in terms of the special parts bin, bits and pieces. And it's, yeah, if you want to go and do at the end of the day, these were supposed to be, the latter 2 certainly were supposed to be road versions of the race cars. You can really get the closest experience to the race car out of that, out of the 3. But then that's again why I come back to the F1, because the F1, they sort of thought, actually, this will make a good race car, let's give it a go, because we've been forced to by our clients. And it worked because it was such a well-engineered and great package. And I, at heart, I'm a bit of an engineer. I studied at university. My father was an engineer, not really sales-orientated like I am today. And the engineering really excites me. And, everything that they've always shown off about the design and the instruction manual and all those drawings and everything about it is just, you find yourself understanding the car more. And I do enjoy the fact that it's got an edgy nature to it that lots of people are really surprised by. And I know there's a becoming quite prolific owner of more than one F1 who has recently started an Instagram page, and he wrote a very negative report on his F1, which he loves, but highlighted all the negativities. And loads of people were really surprised, but that's why they're building the T50.
Yeah.
Is to debug the F1. And that's a great sort of place to start, isn't it? To say, well, that's what we did. And I think also it's bang in the middle of sort of car history. My father's generation, that's as modern as they will ever go. And for other people for me it's different because I love everything, but there are people out there who are younger who that's as historic as they will go. And something that can just do everything so well, including appeal to generations, that car's got it. And then the final reason that I would take it as well, I think it's so rare that you find something that's the most expensive, that's also the most versatile and usable and scores so highly on every single test, including practicality, including reliability, including. It's you don't find expensive hi-fis, you don't find expensive watches that are just as, forgive me for saying it, but plain and accomplished. It's just, it strikes such an amazing balance. If you said to someone, I want you to strike the same balance, you just couldn't.
No. It's because compared to those 2 which are so extrovert in their looks, and that is, as you say, almost so plain, and yet it's something magnetic about its looks that still draws you to it, isn't there?
And even today, people, some people walk past it. 90% of people walk past it. People who know what it is, especially when they're lined up, they do go, that's small. I had no idea that it's that small. And it can seat 3 people. And actually you can seat 3 people in it. And you try putting 3 people in a Speedtail. It's not going to work. But that works. So it's something that Luke pointed out the other day in the office. When you look at them here with their windscreens, and Gordon said, I want a low dashboard and great visibility. And you look at the 3 of them, and the windscreen's ginormous compared to the rest, but it's part of the look. Yeah. It was sort of function over form.
They're expensive enough, so they should be big.
Well, they're unavailable. Apparently until the end of the year that is, though. But yeah.
Absolutely.
And that great story about the royal family who had a few of them, who said, we love it, but we really want to have full blacked out windows. So the salesman said, that's fine, but you have to have 5. So they said, okay.
James, thank you so much for making this happen. It's been, something I shall never forget.
Yeah, and thank you to the owners as well for, for letting us
do that. It's hugely appreciated. Thank you indeed to the very generous owners and to DK Engineering, without whom this test would have remained a pipe dream. And thank you to you all for the kind comments and for responding to our requests to subscribe to the channel. It is much appreciated. It will be hard to top this, but rest assured, we'll keep trying.